Some things are hard to talk about. And if you're thinking, hey, this isn't our usual host Myra Flynn, well, you're correct. I'm James Stewart, the associate producer of Homegoings. Myra is currently in Australia doing all the musical things, so I'll be your host today, and I plan to do some talking about one of those hard things for me and my family. I'll start by telling you about a man named John. John was born in 1913, somewhere, I don't really know where. I don't know who his parents were either. All I know is what John told me, that he was taken from his Native American parents as an infant and adopted by a white family. That would make him a victim of the United States' long history of policies that forcibly removed Indigenous children from their families. One way this happened was through adoption, until the U.S. passed the Indian Child Welfare Act, or ICWA, in 1978. Another way this happened? Residential schools, or boarding schools. These schools were government-sponsored, church-run institutions that Indigenous children attended, often by force, during the 19th and 20th centuries in the U.S. and Canada. The schools were designed to strip children of their Indigenous language, culture, and community and assimilate them into white, Christian, European society. But back to John. All I ever heard about where he came from was somewhere north. He was adopted by a farming family in the middle of Louisiana, and whatever name his parents had for him when he was first born was replaced with the name John Stewart. He was my grandfather. I wish I could tell you more about what he went through. I've gone looking for documentation multiple times, but it's really hard to find. The state of Louisiana didn't require birth certificates until 1918. To get adoption records, you need the names of agencies and birth parents, not to mention how common the name John Stewart actually is. This is why talking about this is hard for me. There are all these stories about white people claiming to be Indigenous when they're not, and that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not asking to be recognized as Indigenous. I'm just sharing the little pieces of information my grandfather told me. As a kid, I sat for hours in a chair next to my grandfather's medical bed. He was sick for most of the time I knew him, had a horrible cough that scared me when I was little. But I'd visit him every day after school. He had a wicked sense of humor and a thick head of fine brown hair, even as an 80-year-old man bedridden with emphysema. He'd tell me stories about World War II, hopping onto freight trains to get from job to job, how he met and fell in love with my grandmother even though he was quite a bit older. But the details of this story, of where he came from, who he was, that's something he couldn't or wouldn't tell, except for what I managed to piece together from him. He passed away in 1993. I was 13. I remember looking in the mirror and seeing his face looking back at me. Square jaws, sunken eyes, high cheekbones, skin that tans reddish-brown, fine dark brown hair. I look like him, but I feel like I don't really know him, at least not all of him, and maybe not even all of me. Like I said, my dad, my family, we don't talk about it, about who John was before he was John Stewart, about who I am, about the history of Indigenous erasure that, as far as I know, is also part of our family history. I'm not really sure why. I mean, there's so little information, I honestly don't know where to start. The times I brought it up with my folks, they just shrug and move on. As Beverly Little Thunder, who we'll hear more from today, observes, there is nothing simple about these conversations. Here she's talking about boarding schools.
So you can't sit in a room and then just start talking about it. It has to be something that people are willing to talk about. And a lot of our elders, who are in their 80s and 90s, they just kind of shake their heads and get this, sad look on their face. And yeah, that was hard. And then change the subject.
From Vermont Public, this is Homegoings. I'm James Stewart. Today on the show, a feature from our colleague Elodie Reed. Elodie is a multi-talented wonder of a person. She creates those lead images for our show, all that beautiful artwork that communicates so much more than just a simple photo. Elodie also brings that special sensitivity to the stories she reports. They're always filled with color, nuance, and humanity, and this story is no exception. In this episode, we'll join Elodie, Huntington, Vermont resident and Lakota elder Beverly Little Thunder, and her daughter Lushanya Echeverria at the movies to watch a documentary called Sugarcane about the horrific history and intergenerational trauma of residential schools.
I'm just looking around trying to see if there's other Native people here, and I don't see any yet.
A heads up, this story covers sensitive material, such as sexual abuse. Please take care as you listen, and if you or someone you know needs help, you can contact the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-HOPE. This is Homegoings. We're a proud member of the NPR network. Welcome home. Homegoings has support from Rutland Regional Medical Center, where healthcare equity and access are the foundations to a healthy community. Learn more about their services and locations at rrmc.org. And by the Vermont Arts Council, working to center creativity, art, and culture for everyone throughout Vermont. Learn more about programs, resources, and grant opportunities at vermontartscouncil.org.
On To the Best of Our Knowledge, we're curious about everything.
I found a post from a gentleman named John who said, I just found out that my great-great-grandfather had a black son.
Did you know that the G's came from France?
Really? Wait a minute, this is my grandfather's grandfather. That's how the discussion began.
To the Best of Our Knowledge, the show that makes your world bigger. Join us. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Ever feel like the wellness landscape is missing something and that conversations are very one-size-fits-all? And that the conversations don't necessarily apply to your experiences? Hi, I'm Dr. Cassandra Dunbar, the host of the Be Well Sis podcast. Be Well Sis explores everything from hormonal health to aging to relationships and everything in between. The Be Well Sis podcast is your home for insightful conversations with incredibly inspiring women from all walks of life. Join us every week and tune into an episode that is crafted to help you thrive physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The Be Well Sis podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. Be Well Sis.
In the car on the way to the theater, Beverly shares what she knows about her mom's and aunt's time in boarding school.
One time my mom were talking, and I was sort of eavesdropping. I was doing something in the room. And my Aunt Gloria said, Christina, she says, remember the time they put us each in a closet and locked the door and left us there overnight? And she's because we were playing with our dolls and we were talking in Lakota. And my mom said, yeah. My aunt said, we were just 4 years old. She says, what makes someone do that to a baby? She said, we were still babies. And she started crying and my mom started crying. I really don't know, the extent of how it affected her. I know that she was not real physically affectionate, but then how could she be? I'm sure she was modeling after the people that she was around when she was growing up.
Which school did your mom go to?
She went to Flandreau.
Flandreau Indian School in South Dakota is on the United States list of federal Indian boarding schools. It still operates as a federally run off-reservation boarding school for Indigenous students, one of the few left in the country.
Beverly, did you attend a boarding school?
I was in boarding school for about 6 months, and then I was sent to another boarding school for about 6 months. And then I went to another boarding school, and I was sent up to a school called Intermountain up in Utah.
Intermountain Indian School is also on the list of federal Indian boarding schools. It operated from 1950 to 1984.
They were mean. That's all I can say is they were mean. I don't don't think anyone ever spoke with a kind word or in a gentle way. They would pull our hair. It was past the time when they would cut your hair, and past the time when, you would get in trouble if you spoke your language. But by then, most of the kids that were there didn't speak their language. There was also a lot of Christian doctrine that, was spilled on us, and it was like, I don't like this. So, and I was old enough where I felt like I could make it on my own, so I ran away.
How old were you?
I was probably about 13.
13?
Yeah.
As we drive toward the theater, I ask Beverly how she's feeling about going to see a documentary that inevitably will reflect some of these experiences.
It was something that I wanted to see. I know that it'll probably evoke some emotions, but I think that film and its content should evoke emotions. And it can be a reminder of the work that still needs to be done.
We arrive in Burlington just as the sun casts a deep golden hue over Lake Champlain. Beverly's daughter, Lushanya, turns around from the front seat to look at her mom, who's in the back with me.
What?
We're going to let you off here.
Okay.
And we're just going to go park.
Okay.
We all walk into the Main Street Landing building.
While we're walking, Lushanya, can you tell me why you're here as well?
Yeah, this story is very interesting to me because the matriarchs in my family were raised with the boarding school mentality, mindset, and practices, but also as an educator, I worked with many Native American families whose families, their participation in boarding schools impacted their current modern day students' attendance at school and trust in schools. So I worked with a lot of families around boarding school, trauma healing and stuff.
Inside, Beverly and Lushanya get some popcorn.
Do you want to taste it to make sure it's...
I don't like salt.
Then we all find our seats in a sold-out theater.
I'm just looking around trying to see if there's other Native people here, and I don't see any yet.
We've overheard some people saying that because of the title, they thought it was about sugarcane, and they're very surprised about what the topic is. That's always great.
Just before the lights go down, Lushanya leans towards Beverly to make sure she has some tissues. And then...
I'm going to turn this off.
I felt dirty as an Indian all my life in residential school.
The nearly 2-hour film braids together 3 stories stemming from the British Columbia-based Williams Lake First Nation. The reserve is known as Sugarcane, and the residential school there was St. Joseph's Mission. It follows an investigation into the atrocities that took place at the Catholic-run school.
For decades, there were reports of neglect and children dying or disappearing from this facility.
It bears witness to survivors voicing their stories, including filmmaker Julian Brave Noisecatt's father.
You do know what happened with me, right?
I want to know the whole story.
And it documents another survivor as he seeks accountability from the Catholic Church.
Being sorry for something is just the first step. You have to take action.
The film holds these stories and surrounds them with scenes of natural beauty, affection between family, vibrant culture, and solemn spirituality. Behind it all is a resonant score composed by Odanak First Nation musician Molly Obamsawin. At the end of the documentary, statistics flash across the screen to remind the viewer that, while this is the story of one community, these schools, designed for Indigenous cultural erasure, were built across Canada, across the United States. In fact, one school on the list was in Vermont, While different in scale to the residential schools that operated for decades, assimilating thousands of Indigenous youth, a Baptist missionary did send 2 Potawatomi teenage boys to the medical school in Castleton in the late 1820s. That's according to reporting by the Burlington Free Press. The Free Press also found out that those 2 boys died from tuberculosis within a few years, and that, quote, both were stripped of their native identities by the times of their deaths, end quote. As the theater lights come back up and audience members begin to chatter, Beverly and Lushanya stay silent, except for blowing their noses. We continue in silence out of the theater and into the building lobby. There, Beverly takes a seat and she begins to speak.
It was hard. And I think about all the people I know my age, that suffered through their parents and their parents' dysfunction. And probably some of them didn't even understand why. They kept talking about healing. They kept using that word heal. And I wondered, I thought I knew what it meant, but I don't think I know what it means. Because, how do you heal from something like that?
Beverly notes the moment in the film when a residential school survivor goes to the Vatican to ask for some kind of response to the well-documented sexual abuse of Indigenous children perpetuated by the Catholic Church. During the summer of 2022, Pope Francis traveled to Canada to give a formal apology for the Church's role in the residential school system. And for Beverly, this brings up a personal experience she had as a child in a church-run orphanage where she lived in addition to federally run boarding schools.
I was sexually abused by a nun. But I know what it's like not to talk about it. It wasn't nice that the Pope said he was sorry. It's so easy to say I'm sorry after the damage is done. There's so much going through my mind right now.
One of those things running through Beverly's mind is the response of the people in the theater around her to what they just witnessed.
Even listening to them clap, seeing it as, an art form, a film, how well done it was, and how it was produced. And I just wondered how many people that were sitting around me and that saw it. Really understood. I heard 2 ladies talking about their geraniums.
I noticed you both holding hands a number of times. Beverly, how did it feel to have Lushanya next to you?
I was glad she was there.
You want me to kick their asses? The geranium bitches?
No, go find out what variety they were.
Beverly Little Thunder, Lushanya Echeverria, and Elodie Reed. Thank you for letting us into such a private moment of reflection. May we continue to talk about even the hard things and not change the subject. As always, thank you so much for listening to Homegoings. It's been a pleasure being here with you. This episode was mixed and reported by Elodie Reed, with additional editing for the podcast by Elodie, Myra Flynn, Michaela Lafrac, and myself, James Stewart. Myra composed our theme music, and all other music is from Blue Dot Sessions. Elodie is also the graphic artist behind our Homegoings artist portraits. This episode features a wonderfully colorful image of Beverly looking thoughtful. Check it out at homegoings.co. We have more shorties and conversations coming for you in the weeks ahead, as well as some big announcements for Season 3. So stay tuned to the feed and be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. If you have thoughts, reflections, or asks of us about who we should talk to or what we should explore, or if you have an idea for a shorty, write us at hey@homegoings.co. While you're at it, sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter and give us a follow on Instagram at WeAreHomegoings. As always, you are welcome here.
We could all use a little help navigating the news these days. The Consider This podcast wants to give you a hand. 6 days a week, we'll help you make sense of the day's biggest news story and what it means for you in less than 15 minutes. Listen now to the Consider This podcast from NPR.